Good morning, everyone. My name is ARPAN BANERJEE. I'm a doctoral fellow at the Department of East Asian Studies, University of Delhi, and academic counselor here at IGNOU. And I have been teaching you the paper, Introduction to International Relations. The code of this paper is BPSC 134. So let us begin today's class. I welcome you all to today's learning session. Let us begin today's class on the paper Introduction to International Relations, BPSC 134. So let us begin. So far in this paper, we have been doing the first block, which was pertaining to basically an introduction of this paper. And as part of that, we have so far covered 2 units. The first unit was pertaining to understanding international relations, and the second unit was pertaining to basic concepts of international relations, like elements of national power, national interest, balance of power, and collective security. In the third unit, which we shall be discussing today, we will be discussing the the evolution of world system up to the Second World War. So let us begin today's class with the unit 3, that is evolution of world system up to the Second World War. So the insatiable wants of humans led to the finest discoveries in the world, and yet also caused wars at an unimaginable level. Humans gave up their nomadic style of living in favor of permanent settlement. They built agriculture to provide food and fodder. Urbanization also took its root. This promoted trade and led to the facilitation of communication. The origin of writing also aided in the communication. But soon the early forms of development fell into abyss after the advent of Dark Ages. Dark Ages brought the reign of superstition and religion, and logic and rationality took a back seat. The Dark Ages soon ended for betterment of society, and European civilization became the dominant civilization in international relations. The rule of West caused the dissemination of ideas of rationality, logic, debate, and reason. Scientific temper was celebrated, and the advent of Industrial Revolution brought in the provision of basic necessities, comfort of industrial goods, and further development of the means of communication and transportation. But the greed of acquiring more and more profit from the sale of manufactured goods led to the expansion of their territories, the expansion of territories by the European colonial power, like the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the British, the French, the Danish, the Swedish. So all these colonial powers, they started expanding their territories and converting faraway regions and societies into colonies. For example, the Spanish, they colonized South America. The Portuguese, they colonized Brazil. They colonized certain African countries like Mozambique and Angola. They also colonized Goa, Dadra Nagar Haveli, and Daman Diu in India. The Portuguese, the Spanish, they had colonized the South America and also parts of North Africa like Morocco. Also, the Spanish colonized Philippines as well. Then came the Dutch, who also colonized many faraway regions and societies like Indonesia. The British, they became the biggest colonizers, the biggest colonial empire. They colonized India. They colonized almost half of the world. The French also were one of the biggest colonizers. They colonized Southeast Asia, and parts of Africa. Also, they had a colony in South America called French Guyana, which still exists today, and in the Caribbean as well. So this gave rise to imperialism and colonialism. The fight to retain their colonies and acquire more led to the 2 world wars and immeasurable loss of human lives. Now let us discuss from ancient to modern. The history at the world level commenced with the establishment of successive ancient civilizations. The hunter-gatherer community gave up nomadism in place of permanent settlement, developed agriculture to produce crops for food, looked for avenues for trade and exchange, and also set up urban cities. Mesopotamian civilization, which is now part of the Republic of Iraq, is regarded as the cradle of civilization, as it gave birth to three major civilizations from 3500 to 1500 BC: the Sumerian, the Babylonian, and the Assyrian. Also in South Asia, we had the Harappan civilization, where urbanization also flourished in cities like Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Lothal, Chanudaro, all these cities like Dholavira, Rakhigadi, all these were big cities in the Harappan civilization. Other early civilizations developed in ancient Egypt along the river Nile, and it ended with the rise of the Roman Empire. The two prominent developments of the civilization were first agriculture, which led to permanent settlement and the proliferation of urban cities, and secondly, writing that facilitated exchange and communication. Around 1600 BC, Shang dynasty sowed the seeds of Chinese civilization, which corresponded with the Bronze Age. Earliest civilization in South Asia arose in Indus River Valley, now part of Pakistan, and it flourished between 2600 to 1900 BC. Ancient India, whose borders stretched from modern-day Afghanistan to Myanmar, not only Bangladesh, but Myanmar was also part, Burma. It arose in 500 BC and gave birth to the golden age of classical Hindu culture and rich Sanskrit literature. Around 1000 BC, also known as the period of classical antiquity, saw the emergence of various civilizations in the area of Mediterranean Sea, like the Greek civilization. It led to the establishment of two prominent cities, ancient Greece and ancient Rome. But the classical world soon descended into chaos when nomadic people mounted an attack on the great ancient civilizations, and the era came to be notoriously known as Dark Ages that spread from Mediterranean to China. It not only affected Greek and Romans, but also all the developed civilizations of Eurasia. In the 5th and 6th centuries, Europe was disrupted by the constant barbarian invasion of Germanic and Slav people, who later settled there. In the 9th and 10th centuries, Vikings, Magyars, that is the Hungarians, and the Saracens carried out further invasions. Saracens were the Turks. The prominent was the rise of the Mongols, the nomadic people in 1206 and 1405, whose empire stretched from eastern frontiers of Germany and from the Arctic Ocean to Turkey and Persian Gulf. Mongol invasion, the Mongol leaders were, of course, Genghis Khan, Kublai Khan, Hulagu Khan, Mongke Khan. All these were Mongol leaders who ravaged different civilizations. Mongol invasion left a deep impact on world history, changing the political organization of Asia and large parts of Europe and the ethnic composition of many regions by uprooting and displacing them. But it also opened the routes and connected Europe with Asia and the Far East. Now let us see the rise of the West. Around 1500, Europe-based civilization became the dominant civilization in the world. Westernization became synonymous with modernization. Non-Western societies started imitating Western countries for their growth in political, economic, cultural, and social spheres. From 15th century and continuing till early 17th century, Portuguese, Spanish, British, French, and Dutch, they explored India and the Far East. They started trading in spices, tea, cane, sugar, tobacco, precious metals, and slaves. Rise of West brought immense changes at the world level. Politically, Peace of Westphalia, which is also called the Treaty of Osnabrück and Munster and Osnabrück, which was signed in 1648 to end the 30 Years' War, it created independent and sovereign states with strong central governments. The 30 Years' War was, of course, fought between Catholic states and Protestant states in Europe. Breakdown of feudalism and advent of market and capitalist society brought socio-economic changes. Industrialization started developing in Britain in mid-18th century, becoming the workshop of the world. Culturally, the rise of West brought in Renaissance in Italy in the Middle Ages. The European intellectuals highlighted the ideas of reason, rationality, scientific temper, debate, and critical inquiry that led to the growth of technological advance and scientific civilization. For example, the printing machine was invented by Gutenberg. There were scientists like Galileo Galilei who scientifically proved that the earth rotates around the sun and not the other way around. The Catholic Church used to believe that the earth is static and the sun rotates around the earth. And before that, they also used to believe that the earth is flat. However, this notion this unscientific notion of the Catholic Church was challenged by Galileo Galilei, who proved that the earth rotates around the sun, for which he was penalized as well. Now, there was a growth of arts as well, like Sandro Botticelli. He also was one of the people involved in the Renaissance that took place during the Middle Ages, the 15th century. It started from Rome and then it spread to entire Europe. There were political thinkers like Niccolo Machiavelli who started talking about republicanism, republican states. So that was a very critical period, a very crucial period, which later on led to the advent of industrial revolution and then the rise of mercantilism. Also, there were political ideologies like those of Adam Smith, who in his Wealth of Nations started favoring capitalism and mercantilism, which later on led to the rise of colonialism. So with the advent of technology and scientific temper, Western countries moved out to establish trade links to an extent that they secured their trading relations with other countries by keeping them as colonies. Therefore, scramble for colonies started. Building of land and maritime transportation and communication lines facilitated trade and migration of people. But this incipient globalization, as Scholte calls it, came to an end with the outbreak of the First World War in 1914. So that is what happened. This incipient globalization that was taking place, as Scholte calls it, it came to an end with the outbreak of the First World War. So even before the First World War, there were certain events that took place. Napoleon, who had gone out to conquer the entire world and the entire Europe after the French Revolution, when he acquired power in the 1790s, when there was anarchy prevailing in France, the reign of terror, and by the likes of Maximilien Robespierre and all. So amidst that anarchy that succeeded the French Revolution, the downfall of the Bourbon dynasty in 1789, Napoleon emerged as a leader who provided stability to France. And then he went on a mission to conquer Europe and entire world, leading to invasions on almost every country of Europe. He even invaded Russia, he invaded Egypt. And also he collaborated with the likes of Tipu Sultan in India also against the British. Tipu Sultan and his father, Hyder Ali. However, when Napoleon's imperial ambitions ended and he was finally defeated at Waterloo, he was first defeated at Elba, He was earlier defeated also before Waterloo and was exiled to Elba. But when he was finally defeated at Waterloo, which is in today's Belgium, and was exiled to St. Helena in 1814-15, the Congress of Vienna took place in 1815, which in a way established peace in Europe for 100 years. And in that Congress of Vienna, what came into existence was called the Metternich system, Clause 1 Metternich. So it was an agreement that was signed by the then imperial powers of Europe, by which they said that they would collaborate with each other, cooperate with each other to prevent any sort of revolution from overthrowing their monarchies. However, despite that, Europe was still plagued by wars. During the 1860s, there was the Crimean War, which was fought between the Ottoman Empire, known as the sick man of Europe, and the Russian Empire. And to aid the Ottoman Empire, the British and the French came in and they fought against the Russians. Then there was the war between Germany and that was known as Prussia and France, as part of which Prussia occupied Alsace and Lorraine provinces of France in the 1870s. And even in the 18th century also, in the 1750s and 60s in Europe had witnessed the likes of 7 Years' War, which Winston Churchill termed as the First World War between the French and the British. That was due to colonial ambitions. Then there was the Spanish War of Succession. So Europe was plagued with war from time to time. However, the growth of militarism in Europe in the late 19th century, that led to the formation of two alliances. So the competition between Britain and newly unified Prussia, which is today's Germany, which was newly unified. Also, Italy was also unified at that same time during the 1870s by the likes of Count Cavour, Garibaldi, and Mazzini. So the rise of militarism, it led to the formation in Europe of two alliances. The first alliance was known as the Triple Alliance. The first alliance was known as the Triple Alliance, and against the Triple Alliance was formed the Entente, the Triple Entente, which is also called the Entente Cordiale. So the Triple Alliance was formed by the likes of Prussia and was joined by Italy as well, and the Entente Cordiale against them was formed by the likes of Britain and France. However, during that time also we see that how these countries, they cooperated with each other to protect their colonial ambitions. For example, when the Boxer Rebellion took place in China, in which the Christian missionaries' activities were challenged, there was an 8-nation alliance that invaded China in 1902. And that alliance consisted of many countries who were fighting against each other in Europe, but they cooperated with each other to protect their colonial interests in China. So the First World War, it started with the declaration of war on Serbia by Austria-Hungary on July 28, 1914. The reason was that the Archduke of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, was assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, who was a Macedonian revolutionary belonging to the revolutionary anarchist organization called Black Hand. Now, when he assassinated Archduke Franz Ferdinand, Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia, and then Russia came to Serbia's aid, and Prussia came to Austria-Hungary's aid. Prussia, that is today's Germany. The First World War was fought between the Allied and the Central Powers. The Allied and associated powers on one side, the Allied powers and its associates, like USA, which came on much later, on one side, and the Central Powers on the other side. The Allied powers consisted initially of Britain and France. Later on, it was joined by Italy, who switched sides. Italy initially belonged to the Central Powers, but 1 year into the war, they switched sides in 1915. They joined the Allied powers. The Central Powers consisted of Prussia, that is today's Germany, which still had monarchy at that time. It consisted of the Ottoman Empire, the frail and weak Ottoman Empire, and it also consisted of Austria-Hungary, the Central Powers. The Allied powers, they included France, British Empire, Russia also, which was Tsarist Russia, Italy, United States of America, which joined 3 years later, and Japan also, it joined the Allied side. Central powers comprised of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire. Now, there was a very interesting reason why USA joined. So in this World War I, initially Germany and its allies, Prussia and its allies were winning the war. However, there was something, what happened was that the Germans they sent a telegram to the Mexicans asking for their aid in the war, because Mexico and USA at that time were involved in a border conflict in North America. So Germans, they sent a letter, a telegram called the Zimmermann telegram. It was a secret telegram. It was supposed to be a secret telegram, that if the Mexicans help out the Germans in the war, then they would help the Germans would help the Mexicans in taking back the territories of California, New Mexico, and Texas, which had been occupied by the United States of America in 1848 US-Mexico War. So, however, that telegram got leaked, and that gave USA an excuse, the US President Woodrow Wilson, an excuse to join the war in Europe. Also, there was an incident in which an American U-boat, which was a British U-boat, which was operated by Americans, was accidentally destroyed by German warships. That also led to America joining the war. And when America joined the war in 1917, the war ended within 1 year. And the Allied side, it became the entire war swung into the side of the Allies, who were initially losing the war. So after the French Revolution of 1789, nationalism became an important factor in international relations. This led to unity as well as divisions. For example, German and Italian reunifications were the result of national aspirations. Dissolution of Ottoman Empire and demands for national independence in Balkans and other East European countries are credited to the rise of nationalism. In fact, it was a Balkan nationalist only, a Macedonian nationalist only, who in a way initiated the World War I, was responsible for the First World War. Gavrilo Princip, belonging to the Macedonian nationalist anarchist organization Black Hand. There were in Greece also in 1830s, Greece became independent from Ottoman Empire. There were calls for independence in Hungary, in Bulgaria, all these countries which were occupied by the Ottoman Empire. Also, there was a rise of nationalism in the Balkans, which led to the formation of Yugoslavia also, comprising of Croatia, Serbia, Montenegro, Bosnia-Herzegovina, North Macedonia, Slovenia. All these countries joined to form the Republic of Serbs, Croats, and Bosniaks, which came to be known as later on as the Yugoslavia. So, on one hand, where nationalism brought the freedom of countries and also led to unification in some, on the other hand, nationalism also sowed the seeds of conflict and tensions. Britain propagated the theory of white man's burden, and Germany upheld the supremacy of Aryan race. Such ideas created the us and other and us divide in the society. Economic imperialism was another significant factor that contributed to the First World War. The advent of Industrial Revolution created the grounds for colonialism and imperialism. Big imperial powers wanted to occupy new colonies to buy cheap raw materials for manufacturing finished goods, buy cheap laborers, and the market to sell the manufactured goods. In this horde of occupying new colonies and to build the political, military, and economic strength resulted in many rivalries and conflicts. For example, the Agadir crisis that took place between Germans and British just a few years before the First World War. There was also the scramble for Africa in the 1860s, which also led to conflicts between the colonial powers. Formation of secret alliances was another reason. After the Franco-Prussian War, Franco-Prussian War, which took place in the 1870s, in which Prussia occupied Alsace and Lorraine of France. When Bismarck was there, his iron law, it was a part of his iron law to expand German territory. Germany tried to keep France weak after the Franco-Prussian War. Otto von Bismarck, was the undisputed leader of Germany for 20 years and dominated European politics also. A secret alliance was concluded between Germany and Austria-Hungary against Russia after the Congress of Berlin, while the League of Three Emperors between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia was in place. Later, Germany entered into a dual alliance with Russia in a reinsurance treaty. Italy also joined sometimes later. This triple alliance was formed to isolate France. After the fall of Bismarck, many counter alliances came forth. France, Russian Entente challenged the triple alliance. In 1904, the disputes between France and British were resolved and they signed the Entente Cordiale. Disputes were also settled between Russia and Britain in 1907 and they signed the Treaty of Friendship. A triple entente was thus formed. This divided the major European powers into two camps, Triple Alliance and Triple Entente, and each one befriended other nations to enhance their military strength. Another reason was the race for armaments. Entire Europe was shaken by the might of Napoleon Bonaparte's army and his adventures. The other nations also had to build up their militaries to defeat him. After Napoleon was defeated at Waterloo, Belgium, new powers emerged and they also joined the arms race. Germany, Russia, Austro-Hungarian Empire started acquiring more military power. Also in Asia, Japan's military strength was not only a concern for the then Qing Empire of China and later on the Republic of China after the 1911 Republican Revolution led by Sun Yat-sen, but it was also a concern for Korea, which was occupied by Japan in 1895. And also for Russia and United States. Russia had lost a war to Japan in 1905. There was the Japan-Russia War, or the Russo-Japanese War, in which the Japanese defeated the mighty Russian Empire. And also it was a concern for United States as well. War became the major factor for establishing superiority during that period in international relations. Following the arms race, Anglo-German naval rivalry became predominant, which was evident in the Agadir crisis, which took place in Morocco, in which the Germans and British navies, they came head to head. Britain was the sole superpower who was the king of seas till the end of 19th century. The British Empire was a naval empire, and it was said that the sun never sets in the British Empire. After Germany, under young Emperor Kaiser William II strengthened its navy, Britain left its isolation and jumped to counter the rising Germany in the seas. Now, another reason for World War I was the absence of an effective international organization. That was also another reason for the breakout of World War I. Though an informal group of major European powers named Concert of Europe after the Vienna Congress of 1815 came into being, but it could not abate the rising conflicts. Imperial rivalries and arms race could not be arrested. It was not a formal organization and did not have the representation of the world countries. The two Hague conferences, which took place in Netherlands, did discuss peaceful settlement of disputes, and the institution of arbitration was also included, but peaceful resolution of disputes could not be brought in. The negative role of press was also considered as a significant point for culmination of the First World War. 40 years prior to the war, several governments made sincere efforts to ease the tensions simmering between countries, but the press played the major spoil sport in creating war psychology amongst the masses. So these were the reasons for World War I. And after the World War I, when the Allied powers emerged victorious and the Central powers comprising of Germany, Austro-Hungarian Empire, and Ottoman Empire, they lost the war. what happened was that the Austro-Hungarian Empire, it got split, and the countries of Austria and Hungary came into existence. The Ottoman Empire was also abolished after the revolution in Turkey by the Young Turks, led by Mustafa Kemal Atatürk, who established the Republic of Turkey. And also another thing took place, the Treaty of Sevres was signed, as per which almost all the all the territories of Ottoman Empire were taken by the Allied powers, comprising of Britain, France, USA, and Italy. And something came into existence known as the mandate system. They were converted into mandates. For example, Palestine was converted into mandatory Palestine. So British and France, they divided these territories of the Ottoman Empire, and it got shrinked to today's Turkey, Republic of Turkey. The Republic of Turkey came into existence after the abolition of the Ottoman Empire, and also the Khalifa, who was not only a political leader but a spiritual leader for the Muslims, was also removed from power, which led to protests across the world, like the Khilafat movement in India as well, led by the Ali brothers. So this is what happened with Austria-Hungary and Turkey. And after the World War I, there was a Treaty of Versailles that was signed in the Versailles Peace Conference, in which liberal institutionalism became a prominent theory of resolving international disputes. And Woodrow Wilson gave his 14 points in that. However, in the Treaty of Versailles, it was a very one-sided treaty. Germany was treated very unfairly. Prussia was treated very unfairly, and harsh restrictions were imposed upon Prussia or Germany. Harsh war reparations were imposed. The war indemnity. They were asked to pay war indemnity amounting millions of dollars by the Allied powers. And even the mineral-rich Rhineland region was also taken away from Germany. Now, when they did not have the money, they were forced to borrow money from US and pay war indemnity to the victors of the First World War. Even their mineral-producing region was also taken away from them. And after First World War, Germany's economic situation became extremely bad, extremely dire. Germany was in dire straits. And there was a very weak state that came into existence because monarchy was abolished after World War I in Germany, and there came into existence what is known as the Weimar Republic, led by Hindenburg. And at that time, when Germany was economically so poor, another big incident took place which further hit Germany's economy, known as the Great Depression in 1928. That took place, and all the markets in US, they collapsed, and US stopped giving money to Germany, which Germany was borrowing from US to pay the war indemnity. That led to hyperinflation in Germany. The German currency mark, it became useless, and Germans were literally scrambling for foods in the dustbins of the streets of Germany. That was the situation in Germany. It was so bad. And at that time rose Adolf Hitler, who instigated the nationalist and racial sentiments of the Germans and told them that they were a superior Aryan race. And his National Socialist German Workers' Party, or Nazi Party, that rose into prominence. And then he came into power in the 1933. Then he unified, in a way, he unified the people of Germany. Also, the economy of Germany improved. And then after Hitler came, he started blaming the Jewish population of Germany for all the problems, for all the crisis of Germany, and also slowly transported them to the concentration camps where they were murdered in cold blood in the gas chambers. After Hitler became powerful, when Hitler started becoming powerful, he wanted to unify all the German-speaking areas. He wanted to bring them into Germany. So he himself was born in Austria. So in Austria, the German majorities were not treated that fairly, according to him, which he has mentioned in his book, Mein Kampf. So what he started was that he launched this policy of Lebensraum. He said that Germans need living space. So what he started doing was that he started expanding Germans' territories. One by one, he started capturing countries. So he first captured Austria, then he annexed Czechoslovakia, and like that, he also invaded Yugoslavia, Greece, and all these countries. And the League of Nations, which was formed in after First World War One in the Treaty of Versailles, that was not able to stop Hitler. They adopted this policy called appeasement. The British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, he adopted the appeasement policy. But Hitler was not stopping, and the German people were also in a way supporting Hitler because he had improved Germany's economy, and he had brought in industrialization, and he had put all the blame on the Jewish for Germany's problems. Now, when Hitler kept on expanding and expanding, there came a point when when the uh, Great Britain, it warned him that if they expand further, they will declare war on Germany. Now, the country that was on Germany's radar in by 1938-39 was Poland, which consisted of a significant German-speaking minority. Now, before invading Poland, Hitler signed a treaty called the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which was signed by the foreign ministers of Soviet Union, Vyacheslav Molotov, and the foreign minister of Nazi Germany called Ribbentrop. As per the treaty, Hitler and Stalin, Joseph Stalin, who was the dictator of Soviet Union, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics at that time, they made an agreement that they would divide Poland half. Half Poland would go to Germany and half Poland would go to Soviet Union. And when they signed that, then finally in 9th September 1939, Hitler's army invaded Poland, and Soviet Union also invaded Poland from east, Hitler invaded from west. And that is when Britain declared war on Germany. And that is how World War II began. And although Britain was still following the policy of appeasement. Neville Chamberlain of the Labour Party was following a appeasement policy. However, that was backfiring for Britain in that almost all the British warplanes, they were captured, and thousands of soldiers were also captured by the Nazis in Dunkirk. And Britain was left helpless, the biggest colonial power at that time, because the British Air Force was not that powerful. Britain was a naval empire. They were left helpless. They did not have any planes. So Winston Churchill, who succeeded Neville Chamberlain, who was a conservative, he had to literally plead before the American President Franklin Delano Roosevelt for some warplanes, and was finally granted a few old warplanes. However, he had to get them dragged by Huskies from the US to the Canadian border and take them to Canada and then take them to Britain, because US had not formally entered the war. And so Britain was really losing the war. Britain and the Allied powers, consisting of France as well. France, who had built a line, a border, which was called the Maginot Line, to prevent the Germans from entering. It also failed, and the Germans, Hitler, occupied France and established the Vichy France, which was a satellite state of the Nazis. So French also fell, the France also fell. Now US had not yet entered the war. However, and after France fell and Hitler went to Paris, he had even celebrated that he thought that he had won the war. However, it was then that Hitler made a huge blunder. So he had two options, either to invade Britain or to invade Soviet Union. The third option was to settle and end the war. But he, instead of invading Britain, decided to invade Soviet Union, with whom he had earlier signed a pact. Soviet Union under Joseph Stalin. Now that was the biggest blunder, and he launched Operation Barbarossa in 1941 to invade Soviet Union, and their troops had reached within 100 kilometers of Moscow also. But that is when the tables turned against the Nazi Germany, because that is when winter arrived, and the Nazi soldiers had not even brought winter clothes with them. And then Soviet Union leader Joseph Stalin himself came on the ground and led his troops in the famous Battle of Stalingrad, which was lost by the Nazis. And then the Nazis kept on losing from there on. They did not even win any battle after the loss in the Battle of Stalingrad. How another important development took place in World War II was when the Japanese, who were also on a expansionist spree, the central powers consisted of Germany, Nazi Germany, Italy under Benito Mussolini's fascist party, and Japan, which was under militarism, Hirohito. Not Hirohito, the military leader was Hideki Tojo, who had imprisoned the Japanese empire, Hirohito. Now, Japan was also on an expansionist spree. In 1937, it had annexed the Manchuria region it had invaded China and annexed Manchuria of China. And also it was conducting genocide of the Chinese as incident in the rape of Nanking. And also it was forcing the women of the colonized country into sexual slavery, converting them into comfort women. So all these things were being done by Japan, and Japan had almost taken entire Eastern Asia into its control. That is when Japan committed a blunder and invaded Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, US. And that gave US an excuse to enter the war. And when US entered the war, just like World War I, the tables turned in favor of the Allied powers. And US troops in 1945, they arrived in in 1944, they arrived in Normandy, which was known as the D-Day invasion, in the Omaha beaches. They arrived, and then they had a very fierce encounter with the Nazis, and then they liberated France. And the Soviet Union, it started defeating Nazis from Eastern Europe, eastern side of Europe, and Americans started defeating Nazis from the western part of Europe. And both of them met in Berlin in 1945. And then the World War ended, and Hitler allegedly committed suicide. However, some say that he escaped to Argentina. That is a conspiracy theory. However, Hitler allegedly committed suicide, and Germany lost the war after US's entry. And also US, to prevent Soviet Union's expansion in East Asia, it bombed Japan. It dropped 2 atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Little Boy and Fat Man, in August 1945, August 6 and August 9 respectively. So after the World War ended, another crisis arose. The start of the Cold War took place. East Europe was occupied, came under the influence of Soviet Union, and West Europe came under the influence of USA. And Germany itself was split into West Germany, called the Federal Deutschland Republic, and East Germany, called the Deutschland Democratic Republic. And Berlin was also split into 2, West Berlin and East Berlin. So the Berlin crisis took place, where Soviet Union stopped US and its allies from giving aid to West Berlin. That is when the Berlin airdrop also took place. The US, through its Air Force, gave dropped food packets and supplies to West Berlin. And after that, US launched the Marshall Plan for redevelopment of West Europe, and Soviet Union launched the Molotov Plan for redevelopment of East Europe. And finally, that led to the formation of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, by the US in 1948-49, and the Warsaw Pact by Soviet Union in 1953. So that was the Cold War that took place, which finally ended in 1991 with the collapse of Soviet Union, and US emerged victorious in the Cold War. So this is what we have studied: evolution of international relations till the World War II. And after World War II, another important thing took place. In 1945, there was the Yalta Peace Conference, after which the United Nations came into being to prevent the Third World War. And so far it has succeeded. Unlike the League of Nations, which failed to prevent the World War II, United Nations has so far succeeded, although it has failed in preventing small wars from taking place. However, it has It has succeeded in preventing a full-blown World War III from taking place, and it still exists today. So in the second block, we are done with the first block. In the second block, we will be studying realism, the unit 4. The second block is pertaining to approaches to international relations. It is really interesting to know that there are only two broad shades of contrasting theories or perspectives about the nature of international relations. One perspective is that the international relations by its very nature is conflict ridden. The other perspective describes international relations essentially being cooperative and peaceful. Broadly speaking, the principal theoretical approaches to the study of international relations agree with one of the above mentioned assumptions. Then there are other theoretical frameworks which try to combine and reconcile the two contrasting viewpoints. Still others criticize these dominant outlooks and offer alternative approaches of looking at the international relations, even change it. The aim and purpose of this unit is to introduce the students to the importance of national power and the international and the conflict-ridden nature of international relations. Realist school is a long-standing and dominant theoretical tradition in the study of international relations. Now, some of the following questions we'll be discussing here. We'll be discussing the core theoretical assumptions of liberalism. We'll be discussing the principal thinkers who have shaped realist school in international relations. We'll also be discussing whether realism stands the test of criticisms and whether it is relevant in understanding and explaining the contemporary world. So the main assumptions of realism, if we talk about, they are logical beliefs and are very important as they are the building blocks for a theoretical approach. For example, we assume that a man is selfish by nature, or that he is a social animal who loves to cooperate and live peacefully with other human beings. These assumptions together help explain a problem and provide coherence to a perspective or approach in international relations. For these reasons, it is important to know the core assumptions of realism that it uses as its basic tools to make sense of the international relations. States are the primary actors in the international system. This assumption of realism has three expressed meanings. International politics is a domain of conflict between and among nations, sovereign states. Conflictual interaction among these sovereign states is the core of international politics. States in international politics are sovereign, unitary, and rational actors. At least at conceptual level, sovereign states are supremely powerful, unified with fixed political goals, and they do cost-benefit analysis. In its interaction with other states, each state seeks to promote and guarantee its own interests. The foremost interest of each state is its own security and expansion of its power. In order to ensure its own security, each state seeks to secure and accumulate power. Power alone deters others from attacking it. In other words, every state is out to enhance and expand its capability at the cost of other states. International relations is anarchic in character. In realism, anarchy defines international relations. Anarchy means that there is no central authority or world government to manage or put in order the international relations among sovereign states, which are distrustful of each other and which out of a sense of insecurity accumulate more and more power so as to become secure. Anarchy is an assumed political condition in which there is no world authority to enforce order. This assumption condition frees the state to undertake cost-benefit calculations and act towards its self-interest or national interest by depending solely on its capability. Capability, military, technological, economic, and political, must continue to expand and become formidable, otherwise the state may risk its life and protection. Control over material resources is fundamental to world politics. In order to enhance its capability, every state is constantly striving to gain maximum control over the material resources, and this tendency to control is fundamental to world politics. Realism tries to justify this assumption by linking it with other assumptions that the approach fosters. States are motivated to have control over material resources because the first reason is that there is no central authority to reasonably distribute the resources among its constituent units. The material resources are not in abundance, and the material resources add to the coercive capacity of a state against its counterparts, which is critical in an anarchic political setup. These reasons motivate a state to acquire more and more capability. Besides E. H. Carr, Hans Joseph Morgenthau, and Kenneth Waltz, a number of other scholars have developed ideas and insights which constitute the core of realist school. Of course, there are important differences among these scholars, for instance, between Morgenthau and Kenneth Waltz. Be that as it may, while certain assumptions and principles constitute the core of realism, there are several strands or categories within realism. Three principles assumptions have been stated above. What are the implications of these and other assumptions? Let us have a look at the following. Sovereign states are the only full actors in an international system. Realists draw from the ideas of Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes had described man as selfish, rational, and calculating, and he had described this international relations as being in a state of nature, that is, bellum omnium contra omnes, war of all against all, in his work Leviathan, Deceive, and so these the works that he wrote. In it, he had described international relations as a war of all against all, bellum omnium contra omnes. In a similar fashion, a state is also selfish, rational, and thinks of its interest first, because the behavior of a state is rooted in the behavior of its citizens. So, state's foreign policy is rooted in human nature. That is one of the basic assumption of classical realists. Something similar was also told by the likes of Thucydides in his work History of the Peloponnesian War, in the Melian dialogue, which was pertaining to the destruction of the island of Melos by the Athenians. He had said that the weak shall do what they can, and the strong shall do what they can, and the weak must suffer what they should. So that is another assumption of realism, classical realism. So a state feels, according to Hobbes, a state feels insecure and remains distrustful of the intentions of other states who think and behave exactly the same way. Such a state has the tendency to prepare for war and expand its power at the cost of another state so as to guarantee its own security. Realism also has so we have discussed Thucydides' History of the Peloponnesian War. Also, there are Niccolo Machiavelli also advised the ruler to be strong and efficient and be concerned primarily with power and security. In his book, The Prince, as well as Discourses on Livy, The Art of War, Kautilya's Arthashastra is also concerned with the survival and expansion of the state. He gives the 4 upayas for the king, Sam, Dam, Bhed, Dand, and also he talks about the Mandal theory, which advises the king whom to form alliances with and whom not to form alliances with. Also, in modern times, we have the likes of Hans Joseph Morgenthau, who has in his book Politics Amongst Nations, Morgenthau talks about the 6 principles of realism, in which one of the first principle is that the first principle of classical realism basically talks about the first principle of realism. It says that politics is governed by objective laws which have their root in human nature. And the second principle of Morgenthau, it says that the key to understanding international politics is the concept of interest defined in terms of power. The forms and nature of state power may vary from time to time, place and context, but the concept of interest, it remains consistent. Universal moral principles do not guide state behavior, although this does not rule out an awareness of the moral significance of political action. So there are no universal moral principles in IR. Moral aspirations are specific to a particular nation. There is no universally agreed set of moral principles. The political sphere is autonomous, meaning that the key question in international politics is how does this policy affect the power of the nation? So serving national interest is political morality. The key guide to statecraft in realist tradition is the concern about the national interest rooted in power. So, and the nation's foreign policy behavior, it is based on the human nature. These are the core basic assumptions of classical realism. However, later on, there arose in 1970s what is called as structural realism or neorealism. It was given by Kenneth Walls in his book Theory of International Relations in 1979 and further expounded in his book Man, State and War. So he says that the behavior of states is not only based on the human nature of the people living in that state, rather it is also based on the anarchy that is prevailing in the international society, in the international relations. So in international relations, there is no world government. So it is anarchy in international relations. So that anarchy, it determines the foreign policy of states. And he says that Kenneth Walls, he gives defensive neorealism. He says that states acquire only as much power as is necessary for them to maintain their security, to maintain balance of power, and avoid and also to address their security dilemma. This is what Kenneth Walls says. However, later on, Kenneth Walls was challenged by another thinker called John Mearsheimer in 2001, who wrote the book Tragedy of Great Power Politics, in which he takes Thomas Hobbes' principle that human beings acquire power after power, and there is no end to the human beings' greed of power. It only ends with their death. So, in developing on this principle of Thomas Hobbes, John Mearsheimer, who gives the concept of offensive neorealism, he says that there is no limit to the state's acquisition of power. They will keep on acquiring power after power after power, which has no limit. It ends only with death. So it is not that a state will acquire a certain amount of power and will stop there. No, they will keep on acquiring and acquiring. There are other theories in realism as well. Recent theories like neoclassical realism, which some of their proponents are Farid Zakaria. He says that the foreign policy behavior of a state, it not only depends on international anarchy that is prevailing, or on the behavior or human nature of the citizens of the state, or on national interest. It also depends on the capability of a nation to convert its resources into power. So different nations have different capabilities in converting their available resources into power. So that capability determines the foreign policy of the states. And also he says that the relations between the different leaders, personal relations, that also determines a state's foreign policy behavior to a large extent. So these factors also need to be taken into account. There are other theories in international relations like the social constructivism given by Alexander Wendt, who goes on to say that anarchy is what states make of it. So different states, they have different cultures, they have different patterns of thinking. So they may perceive anarchy differently. So that is how they determine their foreign policy behavior. Feminist theories given by, so social constructivism was given by Alexander Wendt. Feminist theories, which were mostly given by the thinkers like J. and Tickner and Cynthia Enloe in her book Banana, Peaches and Bases. They say that international relations is male dominated and is intrinsically misogynistic, and females, they have not been accorded their place, and it is patriarchy which is responsible for all the key conflicts that are taking place in the world. There are other theories also like neorealism, and as part of neorealism there is this concept of neorealism which is advocated by the Chicago school, people like Milton Friedman. So neoliberalism, not neorealism, neoliberalism. Neoliberalism says that because of trade, because of commercial relations, the state has become weak, globalization has set in, and countries do not prefer war, they rather prefer trade. Something similar is also propagated by thinkers of complex interdependence given by Robert Keohane and Joseph Nye, who says that states are so interdependent on each other because of rising trade relations that the benefits in trade are more than the benefits in war. So that is why states will prefer trade and commercial relations with each other rather than going into war. So prominent theories that are there. Also, neoclassical realism and neorealism and realism, they also talk about self-help. So mostly, if we see, there are two schools, liberal and realist, and these schools have their different branches. However, the most common schools are liberalism and realism. They have now evolved into different types of branches. There is game theory as well. In this class, we have discussed the evolution of international relations up to World War II, and we have discussed the different international relations approaches. So thank you so much for joining today's class. Namaste.